Which Royals do I think are going to have a big second half? I'll tell you who in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on YouTube, so just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener and want to know a little bit more about me and this show, well, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, co-hosting, and producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you are going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Now today, a little bit more unique. You've seen me do this before. Wasn't able to get an episode up last night. Had some extra work that I had to take on, and just didn't really have the time late into the evening to hop on at 1 or 2 a.m. to do a podcast that would get out in the wee hours of the morning, which didn't make too much sense to me. So I thought, might as well just do one Friday morning, and we'll still do a Mailbag Friday tonight, later on this afternoon. So yes, on, I think it was Tuesday or maybe it was Wednesday, and I said, no, you're not going to have to worry about another late episode, and then I completely backpedal on that and don't get out an episode at all. But we're still going to get our 5-episode minimum that we always have every single week, barring any changes. So yes, we're going to have this episode today and then a Mailbag Friday a little bit later on. Today's show is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah, the right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Check out Booking.com for your stay today. Well, tonight, the Royals are going to be resuming play. It will be the resuming of the second half, and they're going to do so at Kauffman Stadium against the Chicago White Sox. And by all accounts, this should be a very favorable series for Kansas City. They're going to have Michael Wacha tonight. I think it's Brady Singer or Alec Marsh tomorrow. I'll have to go double check. And then it is going to be Seth Lugo on Sunday to wrap up that series against the White Sox. And then they're going to see the White Sox again, I think, right before the end of July. If I'm not mistaken, they'll go to Chicago. And then I think that's it. I don't think they're going to see Chicago in August or September, unless they do have that series in Chicago at the first part of August. But I'm pretty sure it's to close out the month of July. So they're going to have the White Sox 6 times here before the month closes out, or maybe if it's the first week of August. But a great opportunity to kick off the second half with maybe even a sweep. And I don't really say that a lot. I don't just look at a team and say, well, you should sweep them. But the White Sox are a team that you should sweep, and you need to take advantage of every single game you're playing because they are the worst team in baseball, and it's not close. I understand the Royals had lost a series to the Athletics. They had lost a series to the Rockies. However, both of those series were on the road. The Royals are back home for a long homestand, and this feels like a great chance to make some serious ground in the wild card race and maybe even take a wild card spot by the end of this homestand. But we're not just looking at the first 9 games out of the break. We're not just looking at this first series. We're talking about the second half as a whole and who can break out, who should break out, and who is going to have the benefit of that long week off, just to rest a little bit, get your mind right, and know that you've got to be the best version of yourself in the final 65 games here. It's not as simple, though, as you may think it is, because last year, who would have sat down in this chair and looked into the camera and said, MJ Melendez is going to have a great second half? You might have been able to say Bobby Witt Jr., which that was one of the best second halves of anybody in baseball. I think that would have been a fair pick just because he was Bobby Witt Jr., but nobody was going to say, MJ Melendez, considering what he did in the first half, was going to have a great second half. And I'm not talking about a second half that you're just better than you were in the first half. For example, if Adam Frazier plays well in the second half, better than he did in the first half, that's not a breakout candidate. You have to be a top 3 hitter to have this second half breakout tab on you, or you have to have the best numbers in the rotation in the second half. And I think there can be some extra data you look at as to why you think that player is going to break out. Maybe the Royals play a handful of teams that player does significantly better against. But I'm just going to look at it from a gut feel that I have here. And maybe you'll take that seriously. Maybe you won't take that seriously at all. But I look at a handful of guys in this lineup and maybe one guy in the rotation that I think is going to be really, really good in the second half. I'm going to start it off with number one here. And I think it's Vinny Pasquantino. Now, if you can recall back to the offseason, I had said that Vinny Pasquantino was going to be an all-star. And if I was wrong, you could tag it on Cold Takes Exposed and all of that, but nobody did to my knowledge. Maybe because he's still not had that bad of a first half. It just wasn't all-star material. Now, for the second half, I still think that there is a 2022 version of Vinny Pasquantino in there where he can be a guy with a 370, 380 OBP. And I do think that long week off is going to be beneficial to him. And if I'm being quite honest with you, the Royals have to have a really good version of Vinny Pasquantino in the second half to make that extra push. Overall, I'm not going to complain too much about the data. The Baseball Savant page, the Fangraph page, the Baseball Reference page, whatever you look at, I think there are some good underlying numbers that point to him having a big second half, but also he's had those numbers all season long. So it's not like these numbers have just been presented to us and now he's going to go on a tear. I just think that the week off and where I think he's going to end up this season, it's going to take a big second half. I mean, I don't think that he is a guy with an OBP in the low 300s. I think that he is much more a guy in the 330s, 340s, and 350s. And that's what I think he's going to end up at, which means he's going to have an excellent second half. To me, I feel like he's an easier pick offensively when looking at somebody that's going to break out in the second half. I don't think the numbers were that bad in the first half, but I think they're going to be significantly better in the second half. The second guy I think that is going to break out in a big way is the guy that's on the bump tonight. I think Michael Wacha is going to have a phenomenal second half. I think having that extra week off, and he did miss some time with injury, but just to be able to rest everything up, rest the foot up, rest the body up, and the way that he was pitching before the second half closed out, I think we're going to see, 10 to 15 more starts of Michael Wacha and maybe 80 to 85% of them being quality starts, maybe even higher than that. I think that we are going to see exactly what Michael Wacha gave the Padres last year, where he can finish with his ERA in the low 3.2s. Strikeout numbers start to come back a little bit. I think his velocities had an uptick, which is going to lead him to better outings, pitching better against formidable opponents, not just, tonight. I think he's going to pitch fine against the White Sox, but that's not something you hang your cap on. That's not something that you get a badge for or a ribbon for. You're beating a team that already has over 70 losses this season, and the lineup is treacherous. I mean, there's very few guys in that lineup that you have to seriously worry about facing. And they're at home, where the Royals play so well, hit so well. He should get run support tonight off of Chris Flexen. But as I said, we're not talking about a 3-game sample size. We're not talking about a 1-start sample size. This is the entire second half. And I think that Michael Wacha is going to be one of those guys that the Royals really count on and look forward to him pitching every 5th day. I think it's going to come down to 3 starters in this rotation having to carry it the rest of the way. That's, of course, Cole Reagans, that is Seth Lugo, and that's Michael Wacha. Because to me, those are the 3 guys they would start in a wild card series. And if they had an elimination game, it would have to be Michael Wacha on the bump, and I would feel much better about that than Brady Singer or Alec Marsh. 2 guys that I do not think are going to have as good of first halves as they showed through 97 games or whatnot. I think Brady Singer is due for a little regression. Alec Marsh has already kind of shown it, but he's your 5th starter. So you're not really panicking that much about what you're getting from the 5th starter. And lastly, I think a lot of people are going to like this. I think Kris Bubic is going to have a great second half, and that's more so a default answer here. He's only thrown 3 innings, but I think the Royals are going to put him in a lot more high leverage spots. And I think that his stuff is going to play really well in those high leverage spots. We talked about yesterday how you use Hunter Harvey, and it's going to fall on the rest of the guys in the bullpen. I didn't even bring up Kris Bubic because Kris Bubic, to me, hasn't worked in enough to really be considered the lesser end of the bullpen. I think he's going to be thrown into the high end guys here, the high leverage guys, the seventh inning guy, maybe even an eighth inning guy. And I think his stuff's going to be really, really good. If he can stay healthy, I envision him to be the third guy of all three that I just picked there. One of the biggest breakouts. I think that could really significantly boost this team and their playoff chances over these next 65 games or so. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, let's talk about the strength of the schedule and why it's in the Royals' favor. We'll dive into it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to tell you about two sponsors, starting with eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. An eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. We also want to tell you about PrizePicks. It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's also the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the PrizePicks community today. And you can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, PrizePicks has got you covered every week. From lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. PrizePicks is also available in more than 30 states across the country. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a deposit match of up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It is that easy. The second half is going to have, I think, a lot of shaking up. I think there are going to be teams that you look at right now, and they're going to bottom out by the end of this season. I think there are teams that are maybe not as hot at the moment that are going to make a strong surge in the second half. We see it every single year. Last year, somebody that did get to the World Series was Arizona, and Arizona limped into the playoffs. Arizona did not have a good second half. In fact, I think it was a really bad final month or two of the season where they allowed those teams chasing them in the wild card picture to gain some serious ground. But in the end, their lead was too significant for the other teams to overcome. The Royals are not in Arizona's spot of last year. They do not hold a playoff spot. They are 2 games back. They are the closest to the wild card spot, but Houston is a half game back of them, I believe. It's been a while since I've checked the standings, and I still think that Houston on Sunday was trailing the Royals by a half of a game. But let me get the updated look on this. Or excuse me, they're still a game and a half back. So better for the Royals here. They've gotten at least some breathing room from Houston here. Tampa Bay's 5.5 back of Boston, and then Detroit 7 games back. So really it's coming down to Minnesota, Boston, Kansas City, Houston, and likely Tampa Bay in that wild card race. Texas is 7.5 back. Toronto's 9.5 back. And those teams would just really have to have an unbelievable second half to catch one of the playoff teams. But this is not a standings talk thing. I mean, it kind of is if you look at it. But to me, this is all about the strength of schedule and how it can favor the Royals here in the final 65 games of the season. So this tweet that I had found from Brooksgate on Twitter, they're a really good follow. They've got great stats out like this that are otherwise harder for you to find just by searching things on the web. But they ranked all 30 teams from the hardest schedule to the easiest schedule in the second half. Kansas City in this ranks 18th. So they have a pretty easy schedule. Minnesota ranks 17th, so right around where the Royals are, and Houston is 19th. So Minnesota, Kansas City, and Houston all right around each other. You look at Cleveland, a team that is going to be hanging on to their division lead for dear life, I think, in the second half. And it would be, as I said 40 to 50 episodes ago, a catastrophic collapse to be needed for somebody else to win that division. I mean, they had a 10, 11, 12 game lead. And yes, it was still early enough in the season, but blowing a lead with double digits, whether that be in an actual game or in the division, it's almost unheard of. And Cleveland was playing too well to think they could blow that type of lead. But now all of a sudden, the AL Central looks a little bit tighter. Minnesota trails them by only 4.5 games, and Kansas City's only 7 games back of the division lead. And on top of all of that, they have the third hardest schedule left in these 65 games. Tampa Bay is second and the hardest schedule left. And Tampa Bay is one of those teams that's chasing the final wild card spot. And then here is, I think, the biggest piece of evidence as to why it's going to help the Royals in the second half. Boston has the hardest schedule remaining. And Boston is one of those teams, like Kansas City, who have surprised a lot of people. I think Boston is one of those teams that's not built to have that sustainability unless they were placed where the Royals were in their strength of schedule, or they were placed where Texas is, which is 23rd in all of baseball, or Detroit, who has the 26th easiest schedule. Boston is going to have a lot of difficult games, and it all starts tonight. They have to go to Dodger Stadium. I understand the Dodgers have not been playing great baseball, but because of their injuries, I think they needed the All-Star break more than anybody. But they're not just the toughest team they're going to see the rest of the way. They still have to face Baltimore because they're in their division. A few more times, I might add. They'll have to face the Yankees again. They have a series in Fenway Park, I think. It might have been the Bronx. I'd have to go back and double check. But Boston is going to have to go play the Yankees a few more times. They'll have to see the Rays a few more times in that division. Toronto still is a team that isn't great, but they're much better than I think their record shows. They've still got a lot of talent. I think they still have to face Houston. They're going to face Kansas City at Kauffman Stadium. So there is a great chance for the Royals to leapfrog them back for that final wild card picture and maybe keep it. You know, Boston could be one of those teams. I mean, it is baseball. They could take this hardest schedule and run with it and play really well and build themselves up for the playoffs. But to me, this seems more like a team that is going to be, I don't want to say exposed, because using the word exposed is more so for what your record looks like in May or June. Like if you are great in April and then you get exposed in May or June, that's early enough. At this point in the season, nobody's getting exposed. It comes down to health, right? Injuries that could derail your team and how tough your schedule is, how hard your hardest stretch is in the second half. And Boston, to me, has to go through an unbelievable gauntlet the rest of the way, which is why they have the hardest strength of schedule left. Tampa's second, Cleveland's third, and then a lot of those teams that could be vying for a wild card spot, Minnesota, Kansas City, and Houston, all around each other at 17th, 18th, and 19th to close it out. The Giants have the easiest schedule remaining, 30th. As I said, I was just in San Francisco, watched 2 Giant games at the lovely Oracle Park. They could be a team that makes a serious push in the wild card picture, but I understand people listening aren't really too worried about the wild card picture. This was, to me, fantastic news, though, because at the same time the Royals have a schedule that's softening up, they've got other teams like Boston, Cleveland, Tampa Bay that have their schedules ramping up. And I did have a couple people comment and go, well, you know, the Royals had easy opponents and they didn't really do much with it after the gauntlet. The difference this time around is that when the Royals are playing those weaker opponents, which you would think in the second half, if the Royals are going to be a playoff team, yeah, they do have to beat those teams, whether it be at home or it be on the road. But at the same time they're facing those teams, the teams they're chasing are facing much tougher opponents. They are facing the teams that are going to the playoffs that you are going to see in October. And Boston is going to get it worse than anybody else. And it starts tonight for them when the Royals get the White Sox. They have to go to LA and take on the Dodgers. So by the end of this weekend, who knows? Maybe the Royals could have already jumped back into that wild card picture and have a 1-game lead on the Boston Red Sox. Time will tell, though. Still 65 games to go in the regular season. Want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring in the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, let's preview tonight's game and this series against the Chicago White Sox. Next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. We're on Odyssey and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. A few more sponsors to give a shout out to, starting with Booking.com. With summer travel heating up, especially for baseball games, it's time to explore those cities you've always secretly wanted to learn about. Yes, we are talking about your rivals' cities. With hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay even in your rival's city. As I said, the last couple of weeks, I've been going back and forth with it. Was all over the country. In the last 5 to 6 days, finally got back to Kansas City. But when I was in San Francisco, when I was in Arlington, you guessed it, I went right through Booking.com. They had me set up perfectly. It was so easy. Everything we sponsor here on the Locked On page is going to make it easier on you, the listener, to have fun with things that you're buying, tickets, or just booking hotels like you can on Booking.com. From hotels that look over stadiums to family-friendly resorts, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. for your summer travel this season. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com on the site or on the Booking.com app. Also, with it being the homestand opener, the series opener against the White Sox, why not go buy your tickets over at Game Time? It's been a while, maybe since you've hopped on the app and you're thinking about going today, you're thinking about going on Saturday, or you're going on Sunday. Well, you know what I'm going to tell you. You got to buy those tickets over on Game Time. We got a great deal for you if you've never used the app. But if you're going with a friend, you're going with a girlfriend, boyfriend, dad, mom, grandparents, big chunk of people, you don't need to worry about where you're buying tickets or where those tickets are going to get to you, or when, I should say. Game Time is going to take care of everything for you with some great bundle deals. They always show you where the best seats are, the lowest prices, the most expensive tickets. It's an easy app to go through and use, which is why I use it when buying any tickets. So download the app today, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Those terms apply. So again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The Royals begin the second half tonight at Kauffman Stadium. They will see the worst team in baseball, the Chicago White Sox. So yes, this is a series that they are going to take full advantage of. There is nothing else I'm looking at in this series other than just pure domination. I get it's baseball, but this is that series coming out of the break where you are fully rested up. You are playing a team that is barely going to finish the season, it feels like. I don't even know what that roster is going to look like once Luis Robert, Garrett Crochet, Michael Kopech, maybe even Andrew Vaughn get traded away, right? I don't even want to know what that roster is going to look like at that point in time. I do feel, it's a rival of the Royals. The White Sox are a rival. The fan bases don't really like each other. I will say from a baseball fan perspective, I do feel bad for what the White Sox are going through. And I thought that was something I would never say. But 27-71 is an unbelievable record to look at. I don't think that you can truly grasp how bad that is. And the Royals have had their share of awful seasons. And I think even a few times that, they had 70 losses and less than 30 wins, or maybe just had broke into 30 wins and had 70 plus losses. It's not fun at all. There are probably a lot of White Sox fans that aren't looking forward to this series against the Royals. And there are young pieces that I actually think are great to watch. And they're going to see two of them. In fact, the Royals are on Saturday and Sunday. They're going to see Jonathan Cannon, who pitched really well against the Royals way back in April. And they're also going to see Drew Thorpe, who's been, I think, the young prize of the White Sox season so far. I think he's been phenomenal. If you're wondering, this will be the third White Sox rookie to pitch against the Royals this year. I mean, they are doing it the right way when you're 27 and 71. You're just throwing a bunch of young guys out there to evaluate in the same way the Royals did last year. If you're not going to be competing, you got to see what you have in some of these young guys. Jonathan Cannon going to be throwing on Saturday against Brady Singer. So we did get that right. I wondered if it was Singer or Marsh throwing on Saturday. It'll be Singer. And then Seth Lugo will face Drew Thorpe, who's been really good for the White Sox. Their bullpen is a mess. Their offense is a mess. They just DFA'd Martin Maldonado and called up another guy to the roster. I think it was a younger catcher, if I'm not mistaken there. I'd have to go back and double check the name. They did trade for Nick Senzel. I'd expect him to be in the lineup tonight. So they've done some roster rearranging, if you will, going into this series. But I don't look at it any other way than just you got to dominate. You need to take advantage of every single game you have in the second half against the White Sox. And that is severe as sweeping both of those series. I understand it's baseball and this is the big leagues and you are going to be facing guys that aren't just going to roll over regardless of their record. But the Royals are playing at home where they had a 4-game sweep of this team back in April. But I think they're much worse than they were back in April. I think this is a team that had some guys, at least in the back end of that bullpen, that were pitching well. At the point of that series, that was early on enough where, I mean, anybody could be pitching well or pitching poorly. But then in that series against Chicago, they still had guys that they could count on in the final 3 innings. Right now, I don't know who the White Sox will turn to if they've got a lead in the final 3 to 4 innings of a game. Chris Flexen throws tonight. His numbers aren't terrible. None of these guys that are starting for the White Sox have awful numbers. I mean, Chris Flexen's got a 4.82 ERA in 97 innings. Doesn't really strike out anybody. He's got a 4.26 ERA over his last 7 starts. I don't think you can complain too much about that. To me, it all comes down to the lineup. And Michael Wacha shut these guys out over 7 innings back in April. And, the Royals don't have much experience in facing Chris Flexen. I think they'd seen him one time in one of those series in Kansas City or Chicago. But Michael Wacha has pretty much had the numbers of everybody he's faced in this White Sox lineup. Maybe Nick Senzel won't play tonight because he's 0 for 13 in his career against Michael Wacha. Eloy Jimenez is still listed on the roster. He's 0 for 8. Benintendi's 0 for, I think 1 for 11 or 2 for 11 against Michael Wacha. Nicky Lopez is hitting 125 off Michael Wacha. Gavin Sheets is hitting 091 against Michael Wacha. There's just not a lot of numbers going for him. And then Jonathan Cannon, a guy that pitched well against the Royals when they saw him in Chicago. He is somebody that I believe has kind of turned it on of late with being that guy that jumped back into the rotation. He'd been throwing out of the bullpen a little bit, 3.38 ERA in his last 7 games. In his final start before the break, he threw 6 innings of 4-run ball against the Pittsburgh Pirates, a team that could be in the hunt in the second half for the wild card picture on the National League side. And he also had a quality start against Miami on July 7th. So a guy that I think is pitching with some momentum. And then Drew Thorpe is another guy. I think when you talk about momentum and pitching effectively, he's only made 6 starts in his big league career, but coming off a quality start against Minnesota, 2 earned runs in 6 innings, had a quality start against Miami, and had a quality start against Colorado. He's a guy that's very impressive. I'm excited to see that matchup because you get Seth Lugo on Kansas City's side, and then Drew Thorpe, who I believe to be right now the best pitcher outside of Garrett Crochet in that rotation. But Garrett Crochet is not going to be there much longer. So I think Drew Thorpe kind of goes to the forefront of being that centerpiece, that number 1 of the rotation, even in his rookie year. It says more so, I think, about the White Sox than it does about Drew Thorpe, but still, I think a really good talent there. And I'm very much looking forward to that game on Sunday. So Royals have the White Sox for 3 beginning tonight. First pitch, 7:10, Michael Wacha versus Chris Flexen. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. One last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. This is just our first episode today. Later on tonight, we're going to have a Mailbag Friday before the Royals take on the White Sox, so I'll be sending out a tweet. And I've also seen a couple of questions on YouTube, so I'll be sure to get to all of them in our 30-minute episode coming up in a few hours or so. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.